All right, we've got the Treasurer slowly rolling out this intergenerational report this week. It seems like an absolutely key area is yours, that when the government looks to reform, maybe the key area is yours. Would you agree?
I think there's probably 5 big areas of the budget, of which the NDIS is one. But the way to do reform in the NDIS is not by simply saying it's all too hard and just cap and scrap the scheme, and it's certainly not by what some on the far left saying you can't touch anything. If you put the best interests of people with disability first when you make funding decisions, if you make sure that every dollar gets to the people for whom the scheme was designed, I've got no doubt the NDIS has got a great future. It is changing lives for the better. The success stories sometimes get overwhelmed in the discussion about cost growth, but I also think, in fact I don't just think, I believe, that if we make sure that the rent seekers are evicted from the scheme, if we make sure that we get better decision making, if we make sure we've got clear eligibility, if we make sure that the services we funded are genuinely reasonable and necessary, if we have a conversation with the states about looking at what else we've got to do, if we make sure that the housing options for disabled people are realistic and innovative and supportive, yes, I think we can lower the cost growth of the scheme, and I think we can fulfil the promise to not just people with disability but their ageing carers and the Australian people generally, that we can have the best deal in the world for people with disability, which doesn't see money getting squandered.
When does the rubber hit the road on this thing? Is it the next budget or is it before then? You get this review in October.
Well, the rubber hit the road the day we got elected. We've already reduced the waiting time in hospitals for people stuck in hospital with disabilities because there was nowhere to go. We've already sorted out thousands of cases which were jammed in court. We've already reinvigorated the leadership of the agency and the board. We've already got now 44 criminal prosecutions, investigations underway, 14 matters now in court. But we've got more to do, and the review in October will be the next step towards that. We're making progress, but this scheme was basically left to grow untended in a negligent fashion for years. You don't turn it around overnight, but I know that morale is lifting. I know that even in the media, people like yourself, you've seen that we've started to do some serious work and crack down on the crooks, and we're going to see more reform happen. And yes, I do think it's an important area of it for this Albanese government, and it's important to me, and it's important even more so to the Australian people and people with disability. See, disability could be any one of us. We just got to make sure that the promise is well administered, efficiently and equitably done, in the best interests of the people with profound disability.
In April, we had this National Cabinet Agreement, an annual growth target of 8% by 2026, with further moderation of growth, you put it, as the scheme matures. How low can you get that moderation of growth?
Well, I think one's got to be careful of announcing victory before you have a resolution. I have no doubt, though, that I know what we're doing every day now, and I think even our harshest critics would acknowledge that I and the government are pretty engaged in the NDIS reform process. We're doing more co-design with people with disability than ever before. You know, as I said, Kurt Fearnley, marvellous Australian, now chair of the board. He is quite an exceptional Australian in any dimension. We've totally changed the leadership just about at the highest level of the NDIA. The fact is that there is now more prosecution of crooks. One thing I do want to put some service providers on notice is we want to stamp out the habit that when some service providers hear a family or a person has an NDIS package, they double the price of the service. That's not on anymore. It's not just government you're so-called making a profit off. It's people with scarce packages of money and the taxpayers you're ripping off. So anyway, if it was easy, someone else would have done it. But I don't think anyone disputes our authenticity and our desire to get the best possible deal for people with disability. And yes, that does mean working more strenuously with the states, but in partnership. There's no culprits here amongst government. We've just got to all step up and recognise that a disability is a fact of life. It can happen at birth, it can happen in the blink of an eye on a country road, it can happen through the onset of ageing. What we've got to do is make sure we've got the safety net which works in the fairest, most cost-effective fashion, which still gives people dignity.
All right, just a couple of other issues quickly. On The Voice, sure. Pat Farmer had his run today. I noticed the Prime Minister talking about neighbours talking to each other, people volunteering to join the campaign. You've run a lot of campaigns. Tanya Plibersek used similar language to me when I interviewed her on the weekend, actually. Is that the hope of the government, that ordinary people become involved and lift this up, as opposed to it being about the PM and politicians?
I think it's fair to say that a lot of Australians haven't engaged and they're not really familiar with the debate. But what I'm seeing is the grassroots are all over the place, beginning to turn on to the issue of including our first Australians on the nation's birth certificate. People who predict that the no case has got it home and hosed are probably counting, I think that's probably a bit arrogant. I just think it's a matter of having a conversation with the Australian people, and that's what's starting to happen.
And finally, just on news of Victoria and potentially New South Wales, governments funding power stations or effectively buying back power stations. What do you make of all this? It shows it's not all smooth sailing in terms of rolling out renewables and transmission for renewables, is it? What
it shows me is that we haven't invented a clock which could take us back 10 years and make the decisions that we should have made 10 years ago on renewable energy. Unfortunately, Back to the Future is just a film, but we are now seeing what happens if you don't have clear investment policy for a decade. Then you start getting to this, as you would correctly observe, not smooth sailing. Anyway, the universe doesn't grant reruns. We've got to deal with the facts as they are. And I know one thing, thank goodness that we're now starting to provide clarity for investment in renewables. Otherwise, we're just kicking the can down the road for more problems. I mean, Europe's just had its hottest summer ever. Like, when you say ever, climate change is real. Australia can't change it all on its own, but I mourn how it's 10 years of politicisation of the issue. And the people who miss out are just the ordinary people when politicians can't get their heads together and agree on what needs to be done.
Bill Shorten, thanks for your time today.